I'm deeply honored by the invitation, and I've loved coming. Boise is a wonderful place. I mean, this is really a very impressive place. As I'm looking around, I'm seeing assets and I'm seeing things that you can absolutely build and grow an economy with. And it's, if I were you, I would feel excited. I feel greatly privileged by the invitation, and if I understand my assignment correctly, it's to talk about Silicon Valley. And Jay asked me to spend some time talking about what happened in Silicon Valley, why it was that Silicon Valley was able to become the economic superpower that it is, and then what's going on with Silicon Valley right now. And in light of that, what are some things that would be relevant or interesting or significant to folks here in Boise and in your state as you're growing your economy. So I want to see if I can have a look here. Yeah, all right, so here it is. This is Silicon Valley. You're looking at the San Francisco Bay. That's San Francisco at the top, and right here is where people have think about Silicon Valley as where it started. And you can see that it's in this place that's a very narrow peninsula, surrounded on three sides by water, and it's got these mountains and permanently protected open space. And believe it or not, in this little narrow neck of land, we have witnessed the most prodigious regional economy in the history of regional economies. Don't mean that in a braggadocious way, I really just mean it in a clinical way. It's actually remarkable what happened in Silicon Valley. Let me see if I can put some flavor around that. Silicon Valley, for about 75, 80 years, has been home to these constant waves of innovation. What I want to point out is that there are two very important things that have happened in Silicon Valley over the decades. Two phenomena, and they're both critically important. The first is the phenomenon of innovation. This really is a place where innovation has taken place and continues to take place, and all of the groundwork for that innovation is there for whatever reason. The second thing happening in Silicon Valley is what we call entrepreneurship, and so that's the other side of the coin. So there's innovation happening, but there's also entrepreneurship happening. And this chart sort of lays out these waves of innovation. Remember, it starts way back in the I want to say the late 1930s, when Hewlett and Packard went out to their garage and started a company. They were using solid-state physics, and the transistor wasn't even around yet. Vacuum tube technology, that's what was going on. And it went from there into solid state, it went to the transistor. That led to the integrated circuit, that led to computing power with semiconductors, and then stringing them together into computing, and then that leads to personal computing, and then that leads to the software revolution. And so you have all of those waves of innovation, which led finally to the networking of computers, the internet phenomenon, social media, Web 2.0. So there's that whole arc of things that happened in Silicon Valley over the decades. But while that was happening, there was also the phenomenon of biotechnology and pharmaceuticals and recombinant DNA, personalized medicine, genomics. All of these things were happening simultaneously in Silicon Valley. And then alongside that, there's been still a third wave, a third set of revolutions, and that would have to do with energy efficiency, renewables, storage, solar, electric vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure. So all of these things happening in Silicon Valley, wave after wave. Now I want to point out that all of these waves, these different waves, have different characteristics. They have different functional requirements. They have different barriers to entry, different economies of scale. They're actually not, they do not resemble each other. So I just want to point that out as a striking result as you think about things here in Idaho. That all of these industries, these waves of new industries, one replacing another, are completely different. And so there's no body of economic theory that would actually predict this result. In fact, really what's going on here is that Silicon Valley keeps reinventing itself. It has invented itself and reinvented itself over and over and over again with these successive waves of innovation, none of which resemble the previous ones. And that's what's one of the things that's so interesting about Silicon Valley. Here's a chart. I hope you can see these things out there. What we've done is we've laid out Silicon Valley's milestone innovations decade by decade. And so there you can see the first point I was making, that Silicon Valley is this land of innovation, right? These are technical innovations, research scientists peering through microscopes, firing electrons, making electrons dance in special ways. And so it starts with the vacuum tube and goes into all of these different ways of of innovation until finally you get to the 2000s, social media, clean tech, and in the decade we're in now, the invention of the sharing economy, the Internet of Things, big data, data analytics. All right, so there it is, decade by decade, laying out Silicon Valley's history of innovation. But what's even more important to understand is that it's not just the innovation, it's the fact that there are entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley who are attaching those innovations to the marketplace. In other words, starting companies, right? And these are not just random companies. Decade by decade, you have a company or a handful of companies associated with each one of these innovations, and they're household names. They have carved out world domination and market share, and they've changed our lives, changed the world as we know it. And that's happening decade by decade. So it's that combination, innovation and the entrepreneurship. Now I want to make this next observation, which is another thing that's very striking about Silicon Valley right now as an entrepreneurial, innovative economy, is that the innovation is no longer limited to things, to devices, to gadgets. It's actually spread into the realm of business itself. The Silicon Valley innovators are thinking about the delivery of goods and services, and are there ways to disrupt business models? Is there a better way to deliver a service, a better way to deliver a function to the consumer? And can that create new markets and new streams of demand? And you see this also happening over and over. All of these things are not actually new technologies. I mean, seriously, if you think about it, Netflix invented this notion of a la carte television, right? Television on demand, streaming, but they're not using any technology that they invented. They're using existing technologies to do that. And it's actually bare bones technology. There's nothing breathtaking or breakthrough about it. And yet they created whole new marketplaces, and in so doing, let's not forget, disrupted what had been previous pillars of American society. What did they disrupt? They disrupted the broadcast networks, and they disrupted Hollywood, right? By generating now original content on their platform. So the innovation in Silicon Valley isn't limited in any way. It's not limited to geeks with peering through microscopes. It's also people just looking at business and the way that we organize and thinking, is there a different way to do that? Is there a disruptive way of doing that? Silicon Valley. Now, here's the question that we're always asked, and I think this was the question that Jay, when he invited me, wanted to spend some time with. We're asked this every day. People want to know, so what is it about Silicon Valley? Why is it able to do this decade after decade? And why isn't that advantage shifting to some other region? It might be, we'll talk about that in a bit, but this is the question. This is the magic question. I would like to tell you that there's not a simple answer to this question. Truly, there's not. This is actually a complicated question, fraught with nuance and dynamic. And yet, foolishly, I'm going to try to answer it for you in 5 or 10 minutes or less. So, we who have studied this, people in ivory towers who have studied Silicon Valley, have decided that really the reason Silicon Valley is successful is because it's not any one thing, it's not this thing or that thing. It's actually because Silicon Valley has developed a habitat for innovation. That's the reason. That they created an environment, or perhaps a better word is ecosystem. There's an ecosystem in place that makes it possible for these behaviors, right? And what are the behaviors? Innovation, entrepreneurship, and disruption. That's the point that we want to make. And so really the question is, as we look at Silicon Valley, and as we look at other places, how can we create an ecosystem where all of the conditions are ideal for those things? Innovation, entrepreneurship, and disruption. So, what are the features of that habitat? What are they? Well, there are a host of them. But let me just reel through some for you right now, and hopefully this will spark reflection on your own part here in Idaho as you think about your ecosystem and how you are developing it. Well, the first thing that I want to isolate is that in Silicon Valley we've developed a culture. And by the way, maybe you thought I was going to talk about sophisticated things like econometrics and production cycles and how we build an economy around those things. No, actually what I'm putting on the board here are very straightforward, simple cultural concepts. And this would be the first one. I don't think you can understand Silicon Valley without understanding this, that we've created a results-oriented meritocracy. That's what's going on in Silicon Valley. The only thing that matters, the only thing that people talk about are the results. Does it work? Will it make money? That's what people talk about. Now, maybe that seems obvious to you, but I just want to point out that I've lived in other places around the world. I've lived in Asia. I spent time in Europe. I've lived in Boston. That was an interesting several years. And I discovered in those places that there really were other things that mattered. My last name, my lineage, my pedigree, my behavior, how I dressed, how I presented myself, my connections, my political views, right? Turns out those things mattered, and they mattered a lot. And what I'm suggesting to you today is that in Silicon Valley, they actually don't matter. If you spend time with us, and I hope you do, come visit, that stuff doesn't matter. You will experience, you will observe a place where the only thing they're talking about is the result. Does it work? That's the big question. Now, here's the second thing, and it's also a cultural phenomenon. And we would label this as crucially important, which is, in Silicon Valley, we actually celebrate failure, right? We've created a culture that tolerates risk and also where failure is okay. It's totally okay. I want to be perfectly clear. In Silicon Valley, most startups fail, okay? Most fail. And so we consider that perfectly fine. Now again, I've lived in other places. In Japan, when I lived in Japan, failure would become a badge of shame that you would wear for the rest of your life. And it would prevent your future development. That's a fact. Now, it's not the case in Silicon Valley. In Silicon Valley, we have this notion that most startups are going to fail, and the virtue is in trying stuff, trying things, and getting to that failure faster. In fact, we always say fail fast and fail often. That's how we talk about it. And we consider this very valuable learning. And then when people are hiring, they're looking for people that have had failed ventures. They're thinking, that's good, because now you know what doesn't work. Now you can work for us, and you help us understand what does work by virtue of your experience. And by the way, we love it that you learned all of that on somebody else's dime, right? That's how we think about it in Silicon Valley. So we celebrate failure, and we certainly celebrate risk. This is a very high-risk taking culture. Okay, well, the next thing is that we have really strong capital markets. This is a subject that we can talk about for a very long time, and I don't mean to do that. I'm just going to leave the big picture. But I think you already understand this, which is if you're an entrepreneur, if you're starting a company, if you're trying to grow it, you really need only just a couple of things. And the first thing on your list is money. You need money. You have to have money, and you need a lot of it, right? And so in Silicon Valley, fortunately, we have highly developed capital markets. We call it the venture capital industry. And if you're not already aware of this, venture capital was invented in Silicon Valley. It's another example of how Silicon Valley innovated and disrupted, and in this case, it was the financial markets. Because there was tremendous frustration in Silicon Valley when you would go to the bank and ask for a loan. You know what happens, right? Any bankers in the audience? If you ask for a loan at the bank, they'll say, well, do you have any money? And I will say, of course I don't have any money. That's why I came to the bank. I'm looking for a loan, right? But there's that irony built in, which is they won't lend you money unless you already have money, right? And that doesn't work in Silicon Valley. It certainly doesn't work if you're a startup. Now, the successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, scientists, technologists understood that, so they decided, forget Wall Street, forget the banking industry, forget the financial sector, we'll develop our own funds. And that's what they did in Silicon Valley, and now, of course, it's legendary. It's the venture capital industry, and all of it, for some strange reason, is located on one street in Menlo Park, Sand Hill Road, and there they are, hundreds of venture capitalists, legendary ones, the John Doerrs, the Kleiner Perkins of the world, and the Mayfield funds, and they're generating not just hundreds of millions of dollars, but actually billions of dollars in venture capital, and then they're placing it at risk. Now, if you're serious about growing entrepreneurship and innovation in Idaho, you have to have those kinds of capital markets. It's just a fact. Silicon Valley, for whatever reason, developed them and did it in an innovative and a bold way. The next thing on the list, so remember, we're talking about the ecosystem. Why is it that Silicon Valley has been able to create this environment where innovation and entrepreneurship can thrive? Well, the next thing on our list would be the strong labor markets. And here, I'll just point out that we're really lucky. We have a highly educated workforce. I don't know why, we can't take credit for it, but people have come from all over the world to Silicon Valley. The success has built upon the success, and now we have this place where people come and they're highly trained, they're highly capable. In fact, I'll even go a step farther. You should understand that the Silicon Valley phenomenon is really not an American phenomenon. It's not something that we can take credit for. Really what's going on is people coming from other countries, other continents, coming into Silicon Valley. Today, 2/3 of our scientists and engineers are Indian or Chinese. 2/3. 2/3 of them, right? The Silicon Valley population, 41% speak a language other than English as their primary language, came from some other place. It really is a melting pot. And the people who have come have brought with them degrees, graduate degrees, PhDs. They're innovative, they're risk takers, they're highly capable. I don't know how we did it. Honestly, I don't know how we did it, and we keep doing it. And this, by the way, is one reason why people in Silicon Valley, don't know how you feel in Idaho, but people in Silicon Valley are deeply concerned by the tenor of the national conversation about immigration, because we are a valley built on immigration. So that's interesting. Now, we also have in our workforce fluidity, and this characterizes us. I don't know what it's like here, but in Silicon Valley, people change jobs all the time. Every year, 2, 3, 5 years, they'll change jobs. And it's interesting, we can also talk about this at length, but this is just a fact of life. That people will jump to another employer, they'll jump to the competition. There's tremendous recruiting going on. There's bidding for talent. There's talent wars. This is all happening, and it's considered good. It's actually considered all to the good. And the people working in this economy feel less identification with a company, and they feel more identification with the thing that they do, right? They offer themselves up to the world as the software architect. And they say to themselves, I am a software architect, and I'm going to practice my craft for the person that has the most interesting opportunity. The person that's doing the thing that seems the most compelling to me. And so they'll go do that, right? But then they'll move along and when there's a different opportunity. And so in Silicon Valley, people are changing all the time. And labor economists who study this say, really, it's a fruitful thing. It's like the bumblebees in a garden, buzzing around from bush to bush, flower to flower, plant to plant. They're pollinating that garden. And that seems to be what's going on in Silicon Valley. So that too is something that you might think about in a comparative way as you think about growing the economy here. Now, we should talk about the university. This is Stanford University. And here again, another very large subject. But the role of the university and its ties to industry have been a crucial part of the Silicon Valley story. The fact that Stanford is a very open university, there's no gates around this university. Anybody can come on campus, anybody can go into the libraries, into the laboratories. Yes, it's a private institution, not a state-funded one, and yet it's wide open. And there's tremendous collaboration that takes place between the university and industry. Tremendous amounts of it. It happens in ways that are formal, but it also happens in ways that are completely informal. And then the university is very smart about this. Generous leave policies, faculty are encouraged to sit on boards of companies, faculty are encouraged to found companies, and there's this constant flow of commerce and trafficking between all of that. It's amazing, actually. I mean, if there was a study done, and if you took all of the companies that came out of Stanford, where the founders were attached to Stanford in some way, if you took all of them, Google is included in that, and Sun Microsystems is included in that, and you take all of these companies, and you total up their value, it's larger than the largest countries in the world. That's what's going on. It's an amazing thing that's happened. So you have a great university here, and it's the ties between the university, the research, the primary research, and what's happening in the field of industry, I think will be crucially important as you grow your economy. Just quickly, you also need a specialized infrastructure. So again, as we talk about these features of this habitat, well, if you're growing companies, and then if you're quickly scaling them, it doesn't happen without lawyers, accountants, executive search, and all of this specialized infrastructure. And Silicon Valley has developed that, and other economies can develop that as well. That's been important. And then finally, quality of life. It matters. It actually matters. What we've learned is when you study this species, right? The species, and the species would be the entrepreneur, the innovator. When you study that species, we've learned that they work very hard, but they also play very hard, and an environment to do that. And by the way, I'm looking at a magnificent environment here. This, to me, is such a beautiful place. I think that you too can attract this kind of entrepreneurship and innovation in your wonderful environment. Okay, so I know I don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to tell you something. I wanted to shift gears. Now I want to talk out of the other side of my mouth. And I wanted to help you understand another thing, which is, until now, I've been telling you what an amazing economy Silicon Valley is. It's all true. I can defend all of it. We can put that out there in a very clinical way. But what you should also understand is that Silicon Valley is facing major challenges. Silicon Valley is on a precipice. We're on the cusp of something. There are important transformations going on, and most of them are troubling and perplexing to us. And there may be a shift in the offering, where advantage can shift. And to me, it spells a remarkable opportunity to places like Idaho. That's what I think. Well, what are our challenges? They are legion. You won't believe our challenges. For example, we are tremendously challenged by growth. We just, we don't know what to do with all the growth. We can't contain it, we can't manage it. And remember, I showed you that map of the peninsula and how narrow it is. 7 million people live there, 7 million people. We're adding 100,000 jobs to this economy every year. So over the last 6 years, 600,000 new jobs onto that narrow peninsula. We can't deal with it. The traffic is epic. It's just unbelievable. And we haven't built transit systems. We haven't figured out ways to move people around. We're strangling in our growth. That's one challenge. And we're not having adult conversations about it in Silicon Valley. We're not raising taxes. We're not talking about the hard questions. We're not building. We're not investing. We're not creating infrastructure. That's not happening. To me, that spells an opportunity for Idaho. Our housing is an unbelievable challenge. You just won't believe it. I live in Palo Alto, so this is a picture of Palo Alto where I live. Okay, so I hope you can see this. Have a look at this. This is just a house down the street from me, and it's on the market. And look at that. I don't know if you can tell, but the foundation is cracked. It's being propped up by these long boards. The prospective buyers are not allowed to go inside the house because it's condemned. Okay? All right. So guess what? Guess what it's sold for? Yeah. The median home price in Silicon Valley is $3 million. $3 million. So this is a crisis. This is an absolute crisis for the region because people are priced out, and we're not able to house our workforce. And my goodness, I'm looking at this and what an opportunity it represents. You have an amazing opportunity to capture some of this without question. And so we run polls and surveys. In our last survey, 46% of respondents said they're fed up. They can't deal with it anymore. They can't afford it. They're tired of the traffic. They're tired of the frenetic pace, all of it. 46% are making plans to leave the region. Making plans to leave. Where are they going? Why not Idaho? Right? That's, I think, how you should be thinking about this. You have an opportunity. It's also interesting that Silicon Valley's reputation has taken a big hit. This wasn't always the case. Silicon Valley, I think, used to be seen as this heroic figure riding in on a white horse, right? Inventing technologies that we love, right? Things that are changing our lives and all for the better, bringing us more and better and making us connected and making us efficient, right? And that's how people thought about Silicon Valley. But anymore, they're not. They're actually talking about Silicon Valley as a place that has problems, right? These are reputable publications. They were talking about how there's too much concentration of wealth, too much concentration of power, how there's boardroom scandals, how there's how the products themselves have an insidious nature, right? How the platforms can be used for devious purposes, influencing elections, tampering with outcomes, invading privacy. So suddenly, here's Silicon Valley on the defensive. It's like we're reeling and having to talk about whether there's anything positive or constructive happening in Silicon Valley. And so there really are signs that there's stress and there's fatigue on the system. It gets even worse. Here's The Economist. I don't know if anybody saw it, but this is only last week. Here's The Economist saying that actually Silicon Valley's lead is narrowing and other places are rising up. So is The Economist crazy? Actually, I don't think so. There's some things going on here. The big tech companies are actually becoming autarkic, very controlling, demanding loyalty above all else, becoming secretive, right? Not feeding into that phenomenon that I was describing, where people are moving and pollinating throughout the valley. They've become controlling cultures. They also have exorbitant salaries. You won't believe it, but the median salary at Google, the median salary $240,000. That's the median salary. It's out of whack. It's actually out of whack, and it's so bad that the startup companies and the other small and medium-sized companies can't compete. And so our competitive forces now are getting damaged. We have large firms starting to cannibalize the startups. Silicon Valley, remember, is the land of startups. Thousands upon thousands of startups at any given time. But suddenly, Silicon Valley's landscape has changed, where the bulk of our employment is accounted for by just a handful of firms: Apple, Google, Facebook, and Netflix. Right? Over 50% of our employment is in those companies. And these companies have decided that they want to be the innovators, and so as innovation is happening, they are actually gobbling up companies. They're just purchasing them outright, they're acquiring them, and people who study this think, well, actually that is a stifling effect on Silicon Valley's historic dynamism. So there's a problem there too. People are worried about a new culture that's creeping into the Silicon Valley, a culture of greed, entitlement, people focused on the perks of the workplace, free lunches, and celebrity chefs in the kitchen and that type of thing. We talked about immigration and how if that shuts down, Silicon Valley's secret sauce is just out the window. That's a big problem for us. And then, of course, we're talking about this is interesting. The tools that we invented in Silicon Valley that have connected the world and made the world a smaller place. Well, ironically, they might also be driving us out of business, because now you don't have to be in Silicon Valley necessarily. You can have your headquarters there, but you can have everything else somewhere else. And we just FaceTime each other and use Google Chat and use these powerful electronic communication tools that really work. And so again, this is spilling opportunity, I think, for Idaho. And finally, there's the rise of all the rest, right? That there really are dynamic, aggressive, ambitious, and capable regions like yours. They're rising up and attracting talent and building environments for these kinds of things, innovation and entrepreneurship. And not just here in Idaho, not just in the western part of the United States, but also throughout the world. Hsinchu, Taiwan, Bangalore, India, Eastern Europe, Ireland, all of these places are rising up. Now, Jay, you're giving me a signal, right? I'm out of time. Okay, so tell you what, I'm going to wrap it here, right there. I'm going to wrap it by telling you that Silicon Valley is a remarkable place. The properties that made it remarkable are replicable and can be replicated in other places, including especially in Idaho. And the opportunity is like never before, because serious things are happening in our region, and therefore spelling an opportunity for the rest of the country to do these kinds of things and lift their own economies in the way that ours has been lifted. Jay, I want to thank you for the invitation. I want to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to our conversation as the day unfolds.